Hi, I'm Bill Pritchard, Professor of Geography at the University of Sydney. I've been asked to reply to a question that's come in. If we stopped killing animals to eat them, what would happen? Look, there's many angles to this question. There are economic angles around trade and livelihoods. There are human health and nutrition angles about what constitutes a good and healthy diet. And there are environmental issues around the use of animals for human consumption, their impacts on the environment and their impacts on climate change. Now, it's mainly those latter aspects that I'm going to touch on in this brief answer to an attempted answer to this very complex question. So let's think about this issue from a climate change perspective. The food system as a whole is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions around the planet. Producing food for human consumption contributes about 26% of total greenhouse gas emissions from all sources across the planet in any one year. So of that 26%, more than half come from the production and consumption of animals for food. If you think about it, if you think about what we eat at a planetary scale, animals contribute much, much less than half of planetary diets. Yet their impact on greenhouse gases emissions is more than half of the whole food system. So there's a lot of science behind this that says that when you consume animal products, the relative greenhouse gas impact of that consumption is greater than if you eat plant-based products. Now, does it follow from there that we should not eat animals at all? Well, this is where it becomes very complicated because, and let me enter this firstly from a human health and nutrition perspective. In developed countries like Australia, there is a lot of evidence that suggests for long-term human health, we are probably overeating the amount that we need in terms of animal protein. That's not true of every person, but on a population basis, there is some evidence on this. The overconsumption of animal protein leads to a range of non-communicable diseases, including cardiovascular disease and various forms of cancer. So for a country like Australia, it's fair enough to say perhaps we should, across the whole of the population, reduce our animal product intake somewhat and replace it with plant-based input, particularly green leafy vegetables and fruits. But that doesn't follow in other parts of the world. In many parts of the world, particularly the poorer parts of the world in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of South Asia and some other parts of Asia, the greatest dietary dilemma there is that populations routinely have not enough protein in their diets. And of course, they can meet those needs through plant-based protein, but animal protein is a very useful contributor to diets in those contexts. So planetary-wide, for climate change reasons, it's fair to say we need to reduce our intake of animal protein, but that's not true for all segments of the global population. So this is symptomatic of what's the case with many of these complex and wicked problems, which is in order to achieve one outcome, which is maybe a better climate change outcome, we need to think about the potentially unintended consequences of other aspects of the debate, such as food security and nutrition for poorer people in the planet. So I don't think it's as simple as simply to say, let's eliminate animals from human food intake. For a start, people across the planet wouldn't accept that as an outcome. But secondly, it's perhaps not a just outcome for the poorer people in the world. So what can be done? Well, I would argue that what we need to do, and I don't know what the mechanisms for this are, it's probably a combination of politics, changes in preferences, and perhaps impacts around consumption. What we perhaps need to do is to think more about the consumption choices that people are making. And we need to somehow institutionalise a way of encouraging people to make better consumption choices that are fairer for the planet and the long-term future of our ecosystems. One thing that's absolutely clear is that climate change is a real and present danger for the future of humanity, and the eating of animals, given that it does impact more on the climate than the consumption of other forms of meat, suggests that to some extent we can think of animal consumption as having the elements of a luxury good, in the same way that perhaps we might think of air travel and other aspects of consumption that are very high in their emissions levels. And perhaps as a global society, we need to think about ways to curb or control or manage those activities for societal benefits. So as I said, it's a complex question. I don't pretend to do it full justice, but hopefully there's some food for thought. Thank you very much.